Oh, good morning, Woody. How are you?
Good morning, good morning. How are you, Wanda Severe?
Fine, I'm fine. So happy to have you back in the area. To Woody Carter, Dr. Woody Carter, who is the author, theologian, associate professor, and theater arts instructor, who's joining us to talk about Narada's Children, a visionary tale of two cities. Just out, he's going to be having a book signing at Marcus Books in Oakland, 3900 Martin Luther King Jr. Way on Saturday, January 25th from 5 to 7. So you have an opportunity to meet him if you don't already know him, but you probably already know him because he's sort of like a Bay Area staple when he's not traveling. Yeah. So when I was reading your bio, it's like, seems like you're from the East Coast, are you?
Yeah, originally I'm from the East Coast, but I've lived in the Bay Area since 1976 and really have made it my home. I don't think living on the mainland, at least, that I couldn't live anywhere else in the world, but the California, San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah. But when I was reading about your work as a director and as in the African American Studio for Acting and Speech in New York City, it's like, oh, and I didn't know that you taught acting as well at Laney College. When did you do that? What year were you there?
I was lucky enough when I actually got to Oakland in 1976. I found a position was open for a theater arts director, and I applied, and I got the job. So it was probably within 2 weeks after I arrived in the Bay Area that I started working at Laney College, teaching primarily theater arts production to African American students.
Nice. Wow. Yeah, and you have your doctoral work is in religion, theology, and the arts, and it seems from what I was reading that you and your PhD is focused on African American narrative theology, which sort of really works well with the story that you tell in your book because it's certainly a narrative. And there's something to be said about personal narratives, which as a person with a background in theater, but also in in the whole the whole notion of storytelling, how basic that is. And you are a core faculty member in the Bachelor of Arts Completion Program at CIIS, California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. And you taught special topic courses in mysticism and social change, spirituality and transformative learning, and oral history production as applied theology. It's like, well, this sounds so fun. And you got your undergraduate degree at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and the master's degree in theater arts from City College of New York. And what I know you from, I didn't know you had all these accolades. When I met you as director of the Bay Area Black United Fund, when you were chief executive officer there and president, and you all started the health conductors to help our community, Black community, get healthier, not just physically but spiritually and emotionally healthy. This was a long time before they started talking about emotional intelligence and and holistic health. I mean, I don't remember any of. I think this predates that language.
Yeah, I think it does. You would think that the background in theater arts and also going to seminary was so far different from heading the Bay Area Black United Fund, but in fact it was a perfect fit for me, and I was there for 16 years before I retired in 2013. But the issue of looking at African American health became very much a focus, especially around 2003, when the Alameda County Public Health Department cited the African Americans in the county of having a health crisis, and we got involved in specifically looking at the health issues of African Americans as a result of the call by the department to Black leadership, African American leadership in the county, saying, you need to, leaders in the county African Americans. So thus Critical Mass Health Conductors was born.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And sort of looking at the story of General Harriet Tubman, that's where the conductor part comes into the story, and people actually got numbers, and so the lower numbers meaning that those folks, were early on, a part of the I don't know, underground railroad that helped. Yeah, and you talk about that quite a bit in this wonderful book, which takes place in the future and in the past, um, in two different parts of the world. And it seems like one part is East Africa, and then the other is Oakland. It's like Oakland, like I know this place, I know that restaurant, I know that street, and it's just really cool, that this character is telling stories, over a period of 2 weeks. It's just like awesome. Where did you get this idea from to tell this great story? Because it's certainly an allegory, right?
Well, I've lived in both parts of the world. Obviously, I've lived in Oakland for the past over a decade. Since 1976, but I also lived in the Horn of Africa. I used to teach science at a public school in Ethiopia, on the Horn of Africa, near the Ogaden Desert, up in a little town called Harar. For 2 years, and so I knew that part of the world. And initially, I thought it was going to be stories. One about my experience in the Horn of Africa in Ethiopia, and the other one in Oakland. And then I came across and actually read the Indian epic, the Ramayana, that was translated by a man named Ramesh Menon, and was intrigued by this mythical figure called Narada, and who actually tells the Ramayana to this sage, this old man who's sitting next to a river, the Tamasa River, in India, meditating. And all of a sudden, while Valmiki, the sage, is meditating, and he senses this mythical figure has arrived, or has come to sit next to him, and he asks him a question about who he thinks is there a virtuous man, who is the most virtuous man that has ever lived. And thus Narada tells him the story of Rama, which is in the Ramayana. And I just got intrigued with Narada because Narada was cursed, as well as he was a demigod, and also he was homeless and had to be a wanderer and homeless for the rest of eternity. And I kind of thought a lot about him, and somehow the three pieces, the myth of Narada, the story about the Horn of Africa, my experience there, and the development of critical mass health conductors, kind of over time began to come together. I asked the question myself, I wonder what Narada is doing today, since he was homeless and because he was cursed, had to roam the universe for all of time. What would he be doing today? And thus Narada's children was born.
Yeah, and we meet quite a few of his children and disciples in this wonderful story. When I got to the end, it's like, oh, I want I want to keep on going. It's like, should I start at the beginning again, or like try and do it all over again? Because it is just like I was staying up late at night. Like 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning because I wanted to, and I just couldn't stay awake anymore. It's like, okay, yeah. I read this book. I didn't grade papers. It was around the time of finals. My grades were due, but not yet. So it's like, okay, I can read a little bit more. And it's like, oh, I can't talk to Woody for another 3 weeks. I'm like, oh, am I going to remember the book? Oh, my goodness. Because it's like, how do I talk about this? It's like a hard book to write about. Like, how do you write about him? Besides what you told us, that, he's walking on the earth. We know that he's not human. Just because of some of the things he can do.
Mm.
And it's just it's like real magical. I mean, he's phenomenal. I don't know how much you can say about him without spoiling the book, but people think he's a god, and he's like, and he doesn't. He lets people sort of figure out who he is, and he lives cross time zones, and and periods, and yeah, it's just wow, it's just awesome. And then you have this fire that's burning, and people are taught to meditate, and then when they meditate, they can hear the story better. Well, you could maybe do you have your book with you? Could you read us something that maybe sort of like could get our audience like sort of grounded in some of this conversation? Because I don't know what to say about the book because I don't want to spoil it. And then yeah,
well,
but.
I can read a piece to you. I hadn't prepared to do that, but I can do that. Hold on one second.
Super. Okay, cool.
But I tell you, it's amazing to me as well. The length of the book, but also the time it took me to write it, which was about a year and a half. I was in St. Croix visiting a friend in March of 2014, and I already knew that I wanted to write a novel. I had never written one before, and I had gotten a hold of a book, interesting book by a black writer named Walter Mosley, who wrote a small little book called How to Write a Novel. And it said that, and I read the book twice, and I think the main thing that I took away from his book was that you need to write every day religiously for 2 hours. Every day. No matter what, you need to write religiously every day. And I took that to heart. And I found that after the first, I'd say, 2 months of writing, the characters began to speak for themselves. So after the first 2 months, sitting down to write was not so much a chore as much as it was sitting down at the computer, waiting for the characters to talk to me. I was there listening to what they had to say. I was in the moment, in the scene, watching everything that happened, and so I just had to record what was being said. And sometimes the characters would surprise me, and I think that's how it came about. Now I don't have a copy of it with me, but I have an ebook version, which is available. Both the hard copy and an ebook version of Narada's Children are online at Amazon.com, and certainly they will be available at Marcus Books on Saturday. But I did have a section that I thought you might be interested in. But give me a moment. Why don't you ask me something else while I find
okay.
it?
Sure. I don't know I don't know their names. I mean, I have to look through my book. But the young woman who sees, like when Narada shows up, at the well because he's been traveling, he looks pretty bad. I mean, really, really bad. And this young woman offers him some water, and then she takes him to meet her father, and they let him stay with the family, and she falls in love with him. And I just love you have this like independent young woman who's like, her story is just really phenomenal. Yeah, and she's one of the main characters. You can tell us her name. What's her name?
Ahote.
Ahote,
Her
right?
name is Ahote.
Ahote, and she and her father, they have this really cool relationship, and her grandmother's cool too. He raised her. Her mother passed, I think, right?
Yes, her mother passed away when she was very young.
Mhm.
And,
right. Yes.
yeah, that's a good segue, and I'm almost there. The place that I thought I would start with you.
Yeah, and then you have these really cool characters. I mean, so then you got her and her father and her grandmother, and she's a widow, and then but she's a young widow and real cute. and she sits with the men and talks. I mean, whereas the other women, like she doesn't even walk behind them, and she walks next to them. Like, please, I'm not going for that stuff. And which is kind of cool. And and she has these bangles on, and she shakes them. So I kind of like, and her father's looking at her like, whoa, what's going on here?
Well, in the town I lived in Hara, there was interesting. There were two sections. There was a Christian section, and there was a Muslim section. And in the first year I lived there, I learned the language Amharic, and decided that I wanted to move into the Muslim sector. Although they spoke their own language, most everyone in Ethiopia spoke Amharic. So I felt comfortable if they would allow me to move into the old city, which was the center of Harar, and that's what I did. And so much of Ahote and her family's customs, culture, food, way of dress was actually taken from that experience.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really cool. So, how did you end up going to Ethiopia to teach for those 2 years? I mean, what took you?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I was in my 5th year of college. I had transferred from Iowa State University, and I was about to graduate. And about 2 months before I graduated, I was drafted into the Army. The Vietnam War was going on then, and I was drafted, and I went down to the draft board, as I was required to do, and asked for, can I complete college? I only have 3 more months to go, and they were very clear, no, I couldn't, that they needed young men to fight the war right then and there, and that I couldn't graduate, and I needed to come, and I needed to enter the Army. And I had, going back to the university, I had mentioned that to several of my friends, and they said, and I was told, if you join the Peace Corps, you can get a deferment and go to, and so you wouldn't have to be drafted. And so I went down to living in Washington. I was fortunate enough just to walk down to the Peace Corps office, and I met a brother who was in charge of the Africa desk. And I asked him if this was the case, and he said, yes, you can get a deferment if you join the Peace Corps. And there was a big map on the wall right next to his desk with little red pins and blue pins, and he said, look, these are the programs that are starting this summer. Choose the country you wish to go to, and I'll sign you up. And I looked at the map, and his phone rang, and he had to leave the room, and he said, I'll be back in a moment, just choose the country you wish, and when I come back, we can sign you up. And I knew nothing about Africa. I knew nothing. The only thing that I remembered about Africa was that I had met an Ethiopian woman, and I thought she was just beautiful. And I saw this pin in Ethiopia, and when he came back, I said, please sign me up. I want to go to Ethiopia. And so that's how it really happened.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a great story.
I think
yeah, what?
No, I was just looking through, men are not very good at multitasking, but I was trying to find, as we were talking, the place, and I think I've almost found it up.
Yeah, and I want to mention to our audience that the story with Narada, one of the stories takes place in the mid 1850s. Like, whoa. And then the other story takes place in Northern California, Oakland, in 2003. So it's like, wow, that's a big difference in span of time. And it's so interesting the way Narada's audience, sitting out there listening to the stories, they don't necessarily know what these different items are that are in the future, like cell phones and televisions and BART trains, and but they can follow the story, and it's just really interesting, just sort of how powerful story is in shaping character and shaping community the way this story does?
Well, I really um, wanted to document critical mass health conductors because I think it's an initiative that is still going on, still being initiated by the Bay Area Black United Fund, where I used to work, is still happening today. And I thought it was very important to document the development of critical mass health conductors, but I wanted to find a different way of doing it rather than writing a report or a study. And it just seemed to fit very nicely into the development of Narada's children. And you've asked me to read something, and I think we probably talked much about what happens before this particular section in the book. But basically, when Narada comes to town, to Jausu, he is requested to meet with the village elders who want to know who he is. This town is in the middle of a desert. So in order to get there, you have to come, and in the 1850s, you would have to come by caravan, by camel caravan, and usually the only people who came were merchants who were traveling the Silk Road from China to Eastern Europe. And so he arrives in Jausu by himself, without a caravan, without anyone else accompanying him. And it was just unheard of for one individual, one person without food, without any luggage, so to speak, to arrive in a city by himself and survive. And so the elders of Jausu, this mythical city in the desert, call him. They want to know who he is. And there are 9 patriarchs that are sitting in what they call a holy edifice, their place of worship. And Narada comes in accompanied by his host, which is Ahote's father. And they're very the chairman, the leader of the elders, is very deferential to Narada and very polite about asking him. But the other elders, a few of the other elders, are very impatient. They want to know who he is. And suddenly he's just confronted and asked. And this is where I thought I'd start and read this little piece from the book. It says, Narada says to them, "I will tell you who I am, Patriarch Ashkenazi. My name, Narada, means the wanderer, and I am the son of the great mystery, born from his pure thought long before the birth of time. A curse was placed on me by my brother Daksha in retribution for a cruel prank I played on his 2 sons, and our father, the one who has many names, whom you refer to as Ja. Let my brother's curse stand. You see, my brother's sons intended to be creators themselves and wanted to be the first to create a race of men. When they confided their plans to me, I asked them how they could dare to become creators of men before first seeing the ends of the universe. They took my advice immediately and started off on an impossible mission because, you see, the great mystery's creation has no end. So my brother, Daksha, discovering what I had done to his sons, put a curse on me, which I live under to this day. I wander the entire universe without rest and will remain homeless until the end of time. So you see, I'm not a jinn or a spirit, as you would define such a being. I am a force to be reckoned with in our Father's consciousness." The 9 patriarchs and Ibrahim Hafez sat stunned, paralyzed, and had no words to utter. It was as if, after expelling the last drop of air in their lungs, their inhalation took a holiday and refused to come. Time stood still in their holy space as each one tried to wrap his mind around the enormity of Narada's confession. And if they could speak or move, what were they to say to him or do? Should they run and hide in fear or prostrate themselves before this primal force, as he called himself, and bestow upon him him devotion and praise? Narada sensed the internal life of each patriarch frozen in confusion and stilted in thought, and decided to plant the seed of disbelief in Ashkenazi's mind. And Ashkenazi says, "What a fantastic story that is, Narada." Ashkenazi finally said, breaking the spell of bewilderment and fear in the minds of everyone present, for all of us, I think I speak and say, an exceptional storyteller you are. How a living you make when from place to place you travel, we now understand. A trader of goods or rich merchants selling wares, you are not a storyteller, and an excellent one at that you are. And the story goes on from there, and thus begins the tale of Narada, who proposes to them that he would like to tell a story for the next 7 days, each night, every other night, and thus the story continues of Narada's children, who in some way all were cursed like Narada.
Mm-hmm.
That's the excerpt I wanted to share with you.
Yeah, and mm-hmm. It's just such a marvelous book. And when it's so funny when the health conductors came into the story, when we're in the future, I'm like, oh, this is pretty good. And then I understood, you were telling us a story of how the critical health conductors program started, and we get to meet these various characters in the development of this particular project, and then we focus on Arthur, who is, I believe, is he like the director of the organization?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and he's really, oh my goodness, he's so layered. He's great. He's like there's an evil spirit trying to capture his soul, which is so awesome. Oh my goodness, that Bart thing is really cool. Going back and forth and back and forth. and then there's a murder mystery back in the Narada part of the story. But then we find that Narada, he moves like we think he's just sitting there telling the story, but it's like he's like jumping time zones, and like, oh, he's sort of like he's everywhere, which is really interesting. But I really like the hyena man. Tell us about his character.
Well, the hyena man character was taken from a actual real event in Ethiopia that still actually goes on to this day, I believe. There was a man when I lived there in this town called Hara in the 1960s. There was an actual man called the hyena man. He lived on the outskirts of the old city, and he fed hyenas. He would get scraps of meat and food from refuse from the butcher, and he would take them to the hyenas and he would feed them. And people would come and watch him feed the hyenas, and they would pay him. So he was a very lowly figure. He wasn't really probably quite mad. And he would do this ritual every evening, and people would come and watch him, and then they would throw him coins, and sometimes even tourists would come because they knew that this person existed, and they would watch him feed the hyenas. And sometimes he'd hold the meat. If he found scraps of meat, he would hold the meat in his mouth and and the hyenas would come and take the scraps of meat from his mouth. This was unheard of because these hyenas were wild. They were not pets of his. They were not tame in any way, and they were also known, the hyenas, to come into the old city at night and roam the streets, the labyrinthian streets of Harar, where they would look for garbage that had been thrown over the compound walls to eat. And also all of my own experience living in Ethiopia, in Harar especially, make much of Narada's children very much autobiographical. Of course, there are many elements of it that are mythical, that are part of the fiction of the story, that weave these events together. But much of the story, of the narrative, like critical mass self-conductors, and my experience living in Ethiopia, are very much autobiographical and true.
Did you keep a notebook? I mean, how do you remember the details so well?
That's a good question, because My short-term memory is not very good. It's at 70 years old, going on 71. A lot escapes me. But as I mentioned to you earlier, after about 2 months of writing every day, 2 hours a day, the characters begin to speak for themselves. Sometimes I would sit down and write, and I would be awed myself by the end of the time period writing, and much of it was much more than 2 hours. If they continued to speak, they would speak for themselves. So I would be surprised as to what they would say, what they would do. I actually relived the experience, the events, many of the events that are portrayed in the book. I relived as I wrote the story. And I think I've had the story of Narada percolating in me for years. You know, I've always wanted to write, to do creative writing. Coming out of the theater, I think there were a lot of stories that I felt I had the potential to do, but because of my position working in a nonprofit in Oakland, California, and the time it took in leading the organization, I rarely had time to think about creative writing, much less be involved in it. Most of the work that I did was writing proposals and reports and studies, which in itself, had was pleasurable, but very different from creative writing.
Mhm. Yeah, certainly, certainly. And this is not your first book. However, it's your first novel. And did you enjoy? It sounds like you enjoyed it because you talk about how the characters started talking to you, and I bet that's really cool. You're not crazy, but there's these entities, like these spirits, sort of moving through you, like literally. I mean, that was an interesting experience, huh? And do you want to like have it again? Like, do you want to do this again? Like, write another novel?
I do. I actually do. I've been thinking about the sequel to Narada's Children, and I haven't decided that yet. I really have to be patient and let it percolate, so to speak. I've moved earlier this year. I moved to St. Croix in the Virgin Islands, and so I lived there part of the year. Which is where I live now, and I have adult children here in the Bay Area, and so I come here as well. And I'm hoping to do more writing, but I haven't decided on the sequel to Narada's Children yet. Or it might be a very different book, a very different novel. I'm not sure yet. I will have to just wait and see.
Yeah. Wow. So what's it like in St. Croix, and why did you choose to move there? To relocate there?
Well, my wife passed away in 2011, and before she had passed away, Jennifer, we had decided that when we both retired, we would live in another part of the world at least 3 months of the year. So every summer we would travel to a different place, and experience what life might be like in that place for 3 months of the year. Now, St. Croix is a place where I have friends, and we had been several times, and I decided after she passed, 5 years actually after she passed away, that I would live in St. Croix at least for the year to see how that might be. And so I arrived and actually moved there in December of this year, early December this year. So I haven't been there 2 months yet. So I'll be there at least a year. Probably will continue to write while I'm there and see how I like it. And if I do, I will remain. If I don't, I might come back to the Bay Area, or I might move on to someplace else. Sounds very much like Narada, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. Is he a jinn or a man? Is he a god? Who is this person? Yeah, I just love the way Narada, you know, he can read people really well, and has these powers which are really cool. Like making the bugs, go to sleep when the stories are being told. So people don't have to worry about getting bit and things like that. That's really nice of him. And then I also like, sort of the intrigue in the court, with these elders, like some of them that are not going to listen, some of them are going to listen, how they, when the storytelling, the way it works is, um, they have, the people that are really important, they're sitting on these days raised above the other people. And then is it the aroma people that are sort of like the people that were beat by these other folks way, way, way back when, and 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 they can't ever, be equal with the people that won the battle. Even, all these generations later, it just doesn't seem to be happening. Am I remembering the right
Yes,
people?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
The Oromo are people in the book, in the narrative,
Yes.
who have been defeated in a war that took place over 100 years before the story begins by the people, the city people, the people in Jiaosu. And so they are relegated to actually serve the people of Jiaosu because they lost the war. And so much of that history, much of the way the relationship between the city people, the Jiaosu people, and the Oromo has been established as a result of the war that took place long ago.
Mhm. Yeah, and the Roma people, they see a direct parallel between their condition and what's happening to people of African descent in Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's like Narada's have to translate. Oh yeah, that's my people. That many hundreds of years later, the same story, which is maybe that was the intention of Narada, that it's just one human narrative. It's just one story being repeated, but we don't have to necessarily take on these roles that have been assigned to us. We can interrupt this, and so the elders are like, oh, hold up, no, we don't want things to change. So that's really cool, and I was wondering if you could. I know we're going over a little bit. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of the intrigue in the court, in the elders, and how you inserted this murder mystery, which is really cool. And then on the Oakland side, you've got Arthur, and he is so complex. Really nice guy. He's got a marriage that's falling apart, and he's trying to do this work for the community, and he's dabbling in traditional African spirituality. I think the Yoruba, but I think it's through maybe Santeria or Candomblé, or I think, and because he's being haunted. So anyway, I asked you a few questions and one sort of long thing. So you choose what you want to respond to.
Well, the elders, the patriarchs as they're called in the story on the Horn of Africa in the 1850s, in many ways represents the established governance and structure of that day, a governance that and people who were benefiting from how things were in those days, from the poverty of the people to the power and control or decisions on who lives and who dies. The patriarchs were the merchants, the money lenders, the owners of all establishments in the city, and they don't want things to change. So little did they know, in inviting, in accepting this stranger, Narada, into their city, that he was going to be the impetus, the catalyst for social change in their part of the world, and thus they're threatened by him. And we see during the course of the story how each of the patriarchs responds to this threat. So that's one piece. With regards to Arthur, I think in many ways Arthur is prototypical of a much larger conversation, which I know we do not have time for, but I certainly should mention it at least, and that is the issue of spirituality, the issue of African, specifically African American spirituality, which is an issue, is a problem, is a dilemma, we have a spiritual crisis in our community, and it gets reflected in how we see ourselves. The issue of internalized shame, the issues of what we see in our community in relation to although there are many strengths within the African American family, there are many structural issues within the African American family of the day in terms of children being raised by single parents, to the kind of crime, black on black crime we see a reflection of the spiritual crisis that I think is at work in us. And I think for people who are most interested in what might that spiritual crisis be, they need to look, for example, at the Souls of Black Folk, written by W.E.B. Du Bois, who talked about in his preface about the spiritual life of Black folk, the spiritual crisis within Black folk, when he talks about the fact that we within our being, the African American people of African descent, have two opposing forces at work, each warring with each other, each antithetical to each other. One seeks to be accepted as an American in the truest sense of the word, which is a Western worldview. And then we have an African component, African element within our being that wants to be recognized and wants to embrace its Africanness. And these two opposing forces, the Western worldview, which is the American worldview that comes out of a white supremacist reality that wants to be in control of everything that is and ever will be, versus an African worldview that wants to be in harmony with everything that is and ever will be. These two opposing forces have not been reconciled in us ever since we were enslaved as a people, and cause us tremendous strife, and sometimes make us ashamed of ourselves as we try to integrate these two. And I think the book Narada's Children finds a way through the narrative, through story, to look at this issue and grapple with it, and through the character of Arthur and his struggle, we see his struggle in trying to integrate these two, and we also see how he is introduced to both meditation, quiet sitting, and ancestor acknowledgement, not ancestor worship, but ancestor honoring his ancestors, honoring all our ancestors, and meditation, how these two opposing forces are forced to resolve the conflict between the two and come together over time. He hasn't completed this process, but in Narada's Children, he begins this process, and that's why I think Narada's Children begs for a sequel to find out, well, what happens to Arthur over time as he begins this process, this experiential process through quiet sitting or meditation and the honoring of ancestors, how these two opposing forces within his being gets resolved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I just love, Arthur's dreams, and so you go into the unconscious, and he has all these things that he's like having a really full life in his dream state, um, and so that's the really wonderful aspect of this particular character, and then when he meets Luther McKinney, through a friend who. Actually, I don't know if he's through a friend or not. I don't remember. No, I think are they sitting in the restaurant, the Ethiopian restaurant?
Yes, in Sorrow, which is a real restaurant on Grand Avenue in downtown Oakland. Narada Luther McKinney is sitting in the restaurant when Arthur comes in for lunch.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah, and he looks at him, and his soul recognizes him. And he's like, I know I don't know you, but I think I know you. And so he just goes with the recognition, because Luther he calls to him to an aspect of Arthur's person that can't say no to the experience that he's not aware, no, doesn't know what he's going to experience, but he knows, like, I got to say yes to this man, and go to his house. And I just love the scene where Luther is he playing jump rope with the kid? No, hopscotch. It's so cute.
Luther was that character was developed based on the real life of Luther McKinney, and in many ways the character and the name Luther McKinney was in honor of a real person, an African American man, older African American man who died at the age of 92, who was a meditator and a very evolved soul. And so Luther's character is very much taken from my experience with a man who remained unknown throughout his life, except for a small community of people who many feel was a saint, and thought that. So I drew on his experience in the development of the character of Luther McKinney in Narada's Children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then lastly, I really like the way you juxtapose spirituality, whether that is yoga or African spirituality, and the more allopathic medical protocol, around mental health and physical well-being, and how, at least in Arthur's case, his therapist is not hearing, sort of the multiple levels of what's going on with him. Like it's not in his, he doesn't need drugs, he doesn't need medicine. There might be other ways to help him get at, these dreams, which are very much alive, and what he's experiencing in, his marriage, and what he's, the way his apartment looks. You do a really good job in descriptive writing around that apartment. It's like, oh my goodness. And when he gets to home, the housekeeper and her daughter to come, and it's like, they're like, oh no, do we want to take this job? Yeah. Someone once said that your living environment reflects your mental health, your mental environment. So like if your house is like a mess, your mind, your mental health might be a mess too. Like it might be all cluttered and everything thrown off and everything. Maybe that's where the feng shui comes in play. But I really like the way you sort of look at different modalities of health and wellness. But that kind of makes sense with, sort of looking at the health conductors as another story within the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm really honored, Wanda, that you read the book before speaking with me. Many times I've had interviews where that is not necessarily the case, and I really appreciate the fact that you've done that, and really I'm enjoying the conversation.
Yeah. So maybe you could share one more thing from the book. Oh, and I forgot to mention, you don't have to necessarily go anywhere with it, but I like the idea that you have, within the story, in Ethiopia, these children that don't have families, and so they create family, and how compassionate Narada is to those children. They're really children. And we think about, gosh, there's so many young people that can't live at home or getting kicked out of their homes, like here in the Bay Area, but throughout our country and also throughout the world. There are a lot of children that don't have a place to live and don't have adults that care about them, and have come to distrust grown people because of the harm that adults have, rendered in their lives on them. So yeah, that's a really wonderful aspect too, because Narada believes in them, like he believes in the goodness of them, and sort of pulls them up, and those around him to give them a chance. I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Let me read from another place in the chapter where Narada is introduced to the patriarchs. I mentioned Narada tells them who he is, and they just don't know how to respond to what he said. They don't know whether to believe him or not until Ashtanaki says to Narada that this is a wonderful story, and which breaks the silence, and they begin to clap hysterically, not really knowing what else to do. And so the chief patriarch Mirabai then begins to speak, and he says, "My dear Narada," said Chief Patriarch Mirabai, "for a moment please excuse us, so among ourselves we may talk. Brother Abraham Hafez, with our guest, please remain with him." And they ask Narada and Abraham Hafez, who is Haote's father, to go off so that the patriarchs can talk amongst themselves. So Narada and Abraham Hafez got up from the carpet and walked away. Haote's father, his mind still reeling from the story, decided it best to walk a few steps behind his visitor. Recognizing his host was frightened, Narada turned and put his arm around Abraham Hafez's shoulder, which had the immediate effect of calming him. "An idea I have," Ashtanaki said to his companions with enthusiasm, now emboldened by his demonstrated perception and courage to see Narada's incredible farce for what it really was. "From his storytelling, money can be made, and to the people of Jausu, entertainment let us give them." "This, how can we do?" Ashtanaki said Chief Patriarch Mirabai. Impulsively or out of fear, several patriarchs looked to see where Narada was in their holy space before they decided to join the conversation. "In our city, with one of his fantastical stories in an open space for all to see and hear, our visitor let him the people entertain," said Ashtanaki. "Our shopkeepers, tables they can set up, and samosas, sweetbreads, and drinks they can sell at Narada's storytelling. His effect on us, did you not see? And if because of what he says against him they turn, well, arrest him for a heretic, we will, and throw him back to the desert from whence he came. For no one in Jausu on us blame will they lay, if the city's rabble-rouser Narada becomes. Say, what do you? Patriarch Istisham, the respectable and honorable one, was the first to speak. "Well, maybe he is who he says he is. To know, I don't. If the story true it be, and an elemental being he really is, what then? His power we don't know, and if a reason to unleash it we give him, what have we done?" "And they? Narada on the ground like every other man, he pees and shits. A storyteller he is, and that's all," replied Tahawar, one who was rash, as he stared at Narada, now at the other end of the hall. And it goes on from there. And that's the beginning of the story, the second story of Narada, the one that is contemporary, that begins in Oakland in 2003, eventually begins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on the cover of your book, you've got these two wings, like angel wings. You got this burst of light coming out of there, coming in or leaving, because he does both. But maybe I should tell people about the website sleepingmansbooks.com, where they can connect with you. You've got some multimedia stuff going on. And people can buy the book there too, so that's really awesome. But for those who are in the San Francisco Bay Area, you definitely don't want to miss Woody this weekend, Saturday from 5 to 7 at Marcus Books in Oakland, 3900 Martin Luther King Jr. Way, where you can get your book autographed and listen to conversation, which I'm sure is going to be just even more fantastic than this one, because there'll be all of you in the audience to sort of share your ideas and thoughts and listen to Woody's reflections on the work. So thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Thanks for getting up so early, and really appreciate it. Love the book. Looking forward to other writing of yours.
Thank you, Wanda. Thank you, Wanda. I really appreciate your the interview this morning. It is kind of early for me, but it was an honor getting up to and getting prepared to speak to you this morning.
All right. Well, you take good care, and maybe you can go back to sleep and catch up.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Peace and blessings.
Goodbye.
Bye.